When people are asked to name a great leader in the business world, the name Steve Jobs comes up time and time again. But he wasn't always a great leader. It took many years and also many setbacks. So it's no surprise that the latest biography about Steve Jobs is called Becoming Steve Jobs. And I'm delighted to say I'm joined by the co-authors, Brent Schlender and Rick Tetzeli. Brent, who spent 25 years writing about Steve Jobs and becoming a friend of his. Let's go to you, Brent, first, because I suppose you had the closer of the relationships with him. Why did you want to write this book?
Well, anybody who gets to know somebody well, almost as a friend, but who writes about somebody a lot over a period of decades, actually, you begin to see things about that person that you never write about because it just doesn't come up in the course of writing magazine stories. But in the case of Steve, there were many dimensions to his personality that were very memorable to me. That for me, it surprised me that this wasn't captured a little better in the various productions that came out, either the film productions or other books that were written about him, that there just seemed to be something missing, a third dimension missing to the guy that I knew really well. And it seemed to me that other people felt this way too, and that there's such broad interest in Steve Jobs that maybe there'd be public interest as well.
I mean, there's always going to be public interest in Steve Jobs simply, if nothing else, because of what he created. We spoke before, Rick, and one of the things I brought up, which actually I want to bring to you, Brent, was because of that relationship, because of that friendship, a lot of people, the criticism is that actually, were you not too close to Steve to then be unbiased, do you feel, in this portrayal?
Well, it was my job to be not objective, but to be fair-minded. And it was my job over a period of a couple of decades to follow his career and to try to understand not just his business strategies and not just his quirks and idiosyncrasies, but to really understand the real quality of his achievements and to understand why that happened and why it resulted, by the end of this 25-year run, him leading the most valuable corporation the world had ever seen. And, I mean, much, much more valuable than an oil company. And, well, that's not a trivial thing, and so that story can be explored and explored and explored and explored. And just because you follow it closely doesn't mean that you're in any way beholden to the guy you're writing about.
You say it can be explored, and you also mentioned the complicated personality that he is. Because of that, do you think that we'll ever really understand Steve Jobs?
Well, I think we'll understand him more and more. I do. I mean, I think there's much more to be learned about him. There's surely lots of archival stuff that Apple has that at some point would be, wonderful to have access to. I think that, the reason to study him now and to continue to study him is because what he pulled off was so amazing. So, there's a lot of interest in sort of what can you glean from that. And it's not one-dimensional stuff like an obsession with design or an obsession with quality. As Brent said, he was a multifaceted guy, and Apple's recovery was the work of many people, and there were a lot of dimensions to the way he managed that recovery.
What do you think he would make of the Apple now, do you feel?
Oh, I think he'd be very proud of Apple now, actually. It's one of the things that I find interesting is that people think Apple is going off in this, in a very different direction because the watch gets into wearables and there's talk about a car and these other things. But actually, it's all an example of following your nose, following where the technology leads. And that was a key to the recovery of Apple.
And I suppose the key to making Steve Jobs become the person we knew. What is it then that, I mean, we talk about him as a great leader in the business world. What is it you think defines a great leader?
Well, it depends in the medium that you're trying to lead in. And he was trying to lead in a corporate setting, in an industrial setting, in a very fast-moving technological setting where it's a perpetual motion machine. So you could not stand still. You could not stay the same. You had to shift with it. It's like a flowing river, but it's like a whitewater river compared to, say, the Thames or Mississippi. That's what the nature of the digital technologies. They move very, very fast and are constantly shifting. And so to be a good leader in that, you have to be able to be aware and to express to the people who are working with you what to focus on right now, and how to construct that, and to take what we can see around us now, put it together in a way that anticipates perhaps where the river will be a couple of years down. And then when you get there, you do the same thing all over again. And this is the beauty of Steve. His ingenuity was his willingness to turn the crank, to do it once, but not to rest on his laurels, but instead to look up, check the periphery to see if there's something new out there. Grab it, integrate it into the concept, tell his people, I think this is going to take us to the next level, and it'll get us ready to get 2 years further down the line of the river, where the river's flowing. So that is the kind of leadership that he gave. It's this constant, forward-looking leadership that is always open to new opportunities.
So vision, a key to becoming a great leader. Rick, for you, was there anything that you feel that he was missing to a certain extent, or something could have taken him to a next level, or do you think he actually was at the pinnacle?
No, I think he,
I only say that because a lot of people have criticised certain elements of his personality and those things.
Oh yeah, I think that. I mean, I think that as a business leader, if he hadn't gotten sick, he could have kept doing what he was doing for quite a while successfully. He unquestionably had blind spots. He had matured over the years, but some of his behavior was, was all wrong. I mean, if you look at the emails from the collusion case or from the e-books case, you can see that this was a guy who in some ways didn't care about such niceties, even though they were.
Are they needed though to become a great leader? Do you feel?
No, they're actually not needed, but in the long run, that stuff catches up to you, and it hurt him on a personal basis over the years. It can hurt you in the long run. I mean, certainly the example of Microsoft shows that if you don't pay attention to, the legalities as you go along, it can catch up to you. He also, on a personal basis at work, he was great for the people he was close to. But he could still be totally insensitive to people who were outside of that circle, and that didn't hurt Apple in any sort of mortal way over time, but it could have eventually. I mean, he could have distanced himself from somebody really key, and that would have hurt Apple. So he had plenty of things to sort of continue. To try to improve on as a leader, but he was incredibly effective.
So what do you think it is? I mean, either of you can answer this. Then do you think if someone's entering the business world and looking to emulate and become a great leader in the business world, what part of his personality or the things he did? Because I mentioned the top about having setbacks as well. Do you think they should be looking at from his time?
I think what Brent said about having wide peripheral vision, being open to everything around you, so not narrowing in on what your industry is all about, but thinking about everything and how do you bring it in And how do you add that one little element that creates something great? I think another thing that was critical to his success was how he related to the group around him. Apple's executive team was remarkably stable for the last 15 years, and it wasn't a case of a bunch of guys tolerating, a tyrant. He understood how to motivate them. He understood how doing great work is great motivation for talented people. He understood how to reward people. He understood how to reward people financially and emotionally. People used to.
There are a lot of positives here. I mean,
Yes.
and it kind of goes back to the, are you too close? Because even in the book, though, a lot of the negatives, the arrogance, that comes out of it, there are a lot of positives you're bringing up here. What would you say was his biggest downfall?
Well, his biggest downfall was having the bad luck to fall victim to pancreatic cancer. No one would wish that on anyone. That was a real downfall, because it basically is why he's no longer with us. So that he had to deal with that. And that was a tremendous distraction. And that he was able to function as well as he did, as long as he did, is actually kind of remarkable. And that he could keep his head about him when he knew he was a short timer. He knew that he could only live so long, and that it was going to be over. So he had to reevaluate what was important to him those last few years, and began to think about, okay, what am I leaving behind here besides products? Am I leaving a company that can perpetuate itself? Am I letting people understand why I think the way I do, so that they know the reasons why I made the decisions I did, the reasons I made the mistakes I did? Everybody needs to know this really well. So he tried to figure out ways to learn how to share that institutionally.
So do you think that more importantly, those last years when he was ill, is more of his legacy, in that when he was sharing the lessons he'd learned, the mistakes he'd made? Is that more his legacy, do you feel, or everything it encompassed?
I think I think his legacy is defined by those years. He towards the end of his life, he talked more and more about wanting to leave a strong company behind. And he did things to institutionalize that. Apple University was something that they started to try to teach the following executives what to do and what not to do, the bad decisions they've made as well. I think that, you have to look at the 3 years since Steve died as a successful period for Apple. The company is twice as big as it was. It's about to launch something that, may succeed or may not succeed, but the Apple Watch has the same innovative breakthrough heft as, the iPod did when it was introduced. So that's what he left behind. I think that, his real legacy we won't know for many years. I wanted to get back to your point about the negatives and as well as the positives. There are a couple of interesting things about this. I mean, in terms of what people can emulate and what people can learn, Bob Iger said that, the Disney CEO said that as far as he could tell, Steve was always too quick to judge people until the end of his life. Jobs was a Disney board member, and he would dismiss people who came to make presentations to the board. I think that he had blinders on to certain things that he just didn't want to deal with. Jobs prioritized intensely. He could carry a lot of things in his mind, but then he would focus in on what he needed. by prioritizing, he cast things aside, and he cast people aside too. That's not something that, you know, we necessarily want to emulate. But the thing is that's interesting is there is no ideal leader. You are the best leader you can be for the circumstances you're given in the industry you're in. And at the end of his life, he was certainly, you know, the best possible leader for Apple and for the tech industry.
So that's about the leader. I want to finish with you, Brent, to a certain extent, because there are lots of parts of this book which really surprised me to a certain extent from the things I've heard before, and did bring, you know, just surprised me. Was there anything that surprised you to a certain extent when you were writing this, that when you were talking to all the people that in his life, that made you rethink or sort of change your opinion?
You know, the process of putting this book together was one of re-evaluation for me, too, of this person who I'd written about all these years, that isolated instances over a long period of time. You know, each story was a piece of journalism for that particular time. And so when you go back and write something like this, Rick and I both learned this, both being magazine journalists. It's very different when you're describing a trajectory, basically how we got here, than when you're describing an event or an action or a strategy. And so you begin to see things differently. I didn't quite understand why I seem to have sort of fallen out of Steve's favor towards the end, and part of it was my own just infirmity. As a human being, I got sick and lost most of my hearing, and I just didn't function as well as I did before. And I hence was not as useful to Steve in helping articulate the kinds of things that he wanted the world to know about Apple, that he chose to share with people like me. So I suddenly kind of fell out of the loop for a while, and you take it very, very personally, just like...
That does sound quite negative. It sounds like someone who, once you've run your usefulness, you're pushed to the side.
Well, but there was still a relationship there. The thing is that they worked together. They were going to work together on a book, even though they were not working together on magazine stories anymore. So the thing is, the negative and the positive discussion is really an interesting one, because an interesting one, but a sidelight. The fact is, this is the man who led the most remarkable comeback in business over the last half century. And we spend a lot of time discussing whether he was a good guy or a bad guy. And, you know, that's sort of more a discussion that you have on the playground when you're, you know, with some friends and somebody, you know, turns on you. The fact is that Jobs was a difficult man. But what we were trying to do was to try to understand how those decisions were made. And, you know, he had priorities. And at a certain point, he decided that Brent was not useful to him as a magazine writer. Now, he kept the relationship alive, and it was meaningful, but it was not a magazine writing relationship. And so it corresponds in some ways to the relationship he had with people he fired or he let go over the years, who still talked about him fondly because of the work they'd done together with him, or the relationships. They got to know him. The good guy, bad guy thing, you know, is, I've done plenty of things that I'm not proud of. And I did a lot of things that I'm not proud of in my 20s. They have not, you know, I still think I'm a good guy. I know, but the point is, we all change, and he's a complicated guy, and so the good bad thing tends to reduce reduce the discussion in a way that
So it's not about being good, it's not about the bad traits, it's about the fact that actually, in the end, he was a great leader.
he was a great leader. He was a great leader, and he was a human being who treated some people very well and didn't treat other people well.
Thanks, Rick. And finally to you, Brent, then. There were numerous words used in the book to describe Steve Jobs, but if I would push you for just 3, what would they be?
I would say he was, people laugh at me when I say this. I was asked this at the Apple store in Soho. This is more than 3 words. And I said, he's funny.
Okay.
So that's number 1. He was really funny and pleasant to talk to because he was like Bill Clinton. He could spin a golden answer out of nothing. And it was entertaining just to watch. So that's one thing. He was funny. He could be really warm. He came to see me in the hospital twice. He also called me in the hospital 10 years earlier when I had heart surgery. And he called me to berate me for continuing to smoke cigarettes for 10 years after he told me I really ought to quit. So, I mean, this is the kind of guy, he actually does care about people in certain ways. And third, he is the purest idealist, or the most consistent idealist in business that I have ever met, because he really did, at least he convinced himself that he had this higher purpose for everything he did, and that was to help the world have great tools that helps people be more creative and do more with their IQ.
Okay, well, we'll leave it on that, but thank you both very much. Rick Setzelli and Brent Schlinder, thank you for joining us. So funny, warm, and idealist. Those 3 words summing up what Steve Jobs became. The book Becoming Steve Jobs is out now, and a really interesting read into the life of a man who became a great leader.